It will do me as much good in the telling of it, I trust, as it will do you in the hearing of it. Nothing brings me back to my origin as far as to where I began than telling my story. I didn't grow up in a Christian home, and just to give you a brief kind of outline of my background, I actually was born of a Polish father and a Welsh mother. I had a Hungarian grandmother and a Ukrainian grandfather and an English grandmother and a Scottish grandfather on my mother's side. So if it was a dog we were referring to, we would call it a Heinz 57. In other words, I really have a pretty confused or mixed background as far as my cultural origin. My father, up to this present day, is not a Christian. He would believe that the Bible is the Word of God, and I'm very glad to hear that. I'm very impressed because my father at one time was very communist in his beliefs. And however, the home I was brought up in was a good home. We never heard the Bible read. We never had a parent pray with us. We never heard anything relevant to God ever discussed in our home. And the Bible that was in our home was never opened. It was there morally as a pictorial thing because it was kind of nice looking, a big white one with golden letters on it. But my father was good as far as teaching us principles in the home. He was an honest man. And he was a moral man, very upright. And he sought to really encourage us to live and to grow up in such a way that he thought at least we would be good citizens. The two things that my father couldn't stand were lying and laziness. And unfortunately, they were the characteristics of both myself and my younger sister. My father, for all that he did for us, and my father was in the Navy, and I've often said this, he ran the house like a chef. I always called my father sir. Or even to this present day, my wife is quite amazed. She says, why don't you just call him Dad? She calls him Dad. But I have always called him sir. And when he went away, sometimes to go to sea, he would turn around and he would say, I'm going to sea. I'm the head of this house, but while I'm away, your mother is acting captain. So if she has any trouble with the crew, they'll be answerable to me. My father was a very strict disciplinarian, but I don't think he ever acted just simply out of anger. He was very controlled, even when he disciplined us. So I can't turn to my background. I had a good education. I went to university until I was expelled in my third year. I went to grammar schools. We had every opportunity. My parents thought of that. And unfortunately, I lost my mother when I was 13 years old, very tragically. But for all my father sought to do for us, he could not give us the power to live the way he taught us to live, nor could he live that way himself. Let me simply put it this way. My father was a very methodical man. He did the same things at the same time of day all the time. He went to the same places to fish. He read his newspaper at the same time. He sat at the table for supper at the same time. If it wasn't served, he wanted to know why. His place was the same place all the time. He actually used to wear, my mother had a difficult time getting him to buy new clothes because he liked to wear the same clothes all the time. And what really worried me about my father was, I used to think to myself, all my father does, he gets up, he goes to work to earn a living, to come home, to bring up his family, who will go to work to earn a living, who come home to bring up their families, and where's the purpose of it? Where's the fulfillment in it? It just seemed so empty to me. And I made my mind up, even as a young boy, I thought, my life is going to mean something. I'm going to find out some reason other than just this almost lethargy for living. And I'm sad to say that by the time I was 18 years old or 19, I was a drug addict. You know, oftentimes people hear that sort of a story and they think that's always the story of kids that were brought up on the wrong side of the streets. That's the down and outer. That's the person that didn't have parents that had any money or didn't give them any opportunities. Let me say this, that most of the people that I knew in my addiction, and they were involved with me, and most of them today are dead. Came from good homes. They came from good homes. A lot of them had scholarships at universities. A lot of them had purpose, ambitions, and yet somehow they got sidetracked. The emptiness in life sidetracked them, and they became drug addicts. Nobody ever became a drug addict by choice. Nobody decided, I want to be a drug addict. Nobody ever planned on dying a drug addict. All I used to think of as a young man was this: I'm just dabbling in it. I'm just playing with it. And I remember my father, I only ever saw my father cry twice. Like I said, he was a very factual man. He didn't show a lot of feelings or emotion, but twice my father cried, and I saw him cry, and cry with a real depth to it. The first time was slumped over the railing of a bridge after my mother died. And I thought for sure he was going to go over the bridge, and I remember saying to him, as a boy of 13, Dad, don't do it. We got nobody else. Don't leave us. We got nobody else. And he just wept his heart out. The other time I saw my father cry, and I'll never forget it, I would do anything to reverse that and take that away. Was him sitting in an old Jaguar Mark 9 with a boy of 18 years old, looking at me and saying, son, you're taking a course that's going to destroy you. It's going to destroy you. And I'm absolutely helpless to do anything about it. I would do anything to stop you. And he just hung onto that steering wheel and he sobbed. And I remember putting my arm around him. I said, Dad, don't worry. It's just kicks. I can handle it. I can handle it. You can't handle it. You really can't handle it. And so by the time I was 19, 20 years old, I was a drug addict. I was a heavy user. I hardly used marijuana. I didn't have much time for it, though I will admit this. Generally, the use of marijuana is a pathway that leads to the wider avenue of harder drug use. Sad thing if a government ever determines to legalize it, because many individuals I know that became what we call very active addicts and died tragically, first started by the use of marijuana and then LSD. I must admit, I jumped in with both feet. The first drugs I ever used were what we call speedballs. They were a mixture of methadone, or rather methamphetamines, and heroin that we referred to as skag. And within 3 months, scholarships that I got at university, student loans that I had to finish my course in my 3rd year, I had spent everything I had. I was reduced to the point that the only way I could support my habit was selling it to others. I won't go into my background as far as how I became what I was. Listen, there are things I'm absolutely ashamed of, but I thank God they're under the blood. But I will say this. I started, first of all, muling. Muling simply means I became a carrier, especially across borders, and would bring amounts of drugs, doing the transaction for the money, bring it back to the base where I had to bring it, and instead of getting money for doing it, I got a share of it. I progressed from there. I thought I was going up, but I was going down. Collecting. In other words, going around hurting other people or with people that hurt other people to collect money for drugs. Even working as an enforcer to support individuals, maintain what they called their turf, their territory. And finally, when I was about 20 years old, 21 years old, I moved over to Prince Edward Island, Charlottetown. In fact, the reason I went there was a gang war in Halifax where I lived. And a lot of the dealers that were involved with the bike gangs, I was involved with a gang that was called the 13th Tribe, which are now called Hell's Angels. We're warring with another faction, what were called Satan's Choice. All these names. And I must admit, very characteristic of the very names they use. And they were killing off the dealers. They were killing off the enforcers. There were people getting killed. It was very serious. And so I basically took what I had and fled and went to Prince Edward Island. I'd been expelled by that time from university. And over in Prince Edward Island, like an individual that was contaminated with a disease, instead of going over there and getting away from it and getting better, I just started spreading it. Until finding myself and another man, who's now dead, were actually the two men that divided Prince Edward Island as far as the drug territory. And I was one of the main men who were running drugs in Prince Edward Island, and God saved me.